if you're listening to this, you know who you are. You live in Oregon. You used to go climbing, and we reached out to you. If you want your phone back, we still have it. It is yours.
Welcome to Go No Go. I'm John Brunner. This is a podcast where we talk about design, engineering, manufacturing, and the calls that can make or break great products. This is CES week, so we have an episode lined up about consumer electronics. We begin with an interview with iFixit's lead teardown technician, Shahram Mokhtari, who's able to look inside just about any product and come to an understanding of how it's made and what sets it apart. After that, we'll talk about headlines from the world of manufacturing and product development, and then go into Reconstructions, where we revisit an historical event that changed the world of product development forever. Now, on to the interview. My guest today is Shahram Mokhtari, who's the lead teardown technician at iFixit, and we're shooting from your own studio here at iFixit headquarters in San Luis Obispo, California. It's so great to have you on here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a new experience for me, so it's pretty cool.
Awesome. So, what is a day in the life of a teardown artist like? What are you actually spending most of your time on?
Artiste is a very strong word. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I believe it's French, artiste. A day in the life, it's an exciting job. It's a lot of hard work, and I think any YouTube creator will tell you the same thing. We're lucky enough to have an entire team behind us here. So we've got video guys, we've got engineers on staff, we have actual subject matter experts to support myself or anybody else performing the teardowns. But it's an exciting lifestyle. We get to play with the latest gadgets. We get to play with some older gadgets sometimes, and we get to look at the guts of the hardware. So if you're a tech nerd, if you're a hardware nerd, this is a bit of a dream job.
I think a lot of us have come to understand what is inside modern electronics through your teardowns. So thank you. It's a service to the community.
Oh no, like I said, that's an amazing compliment. I wish I could take credit for it, but like I said, everything I just happen to be in front of the camera most of the time. So there's an entire team that goes into this. There are at least a half dozen people for every single teardown, and much bigger teams for larger teardowns that we do.
So walk us through what happens. Let's say a new phone or a new wireless earbud is coming out. You know that it's going to come out in 2 weeks. The clock is running. How do you plan and execute a teardown?
I think that's your typical Apple teardown. So Apple devices are a really good example for major teardowns. Apple's iPhones are the most successful product in human history. They have sold the most. They have made the most amount of money. There's a reason why Apple has become one of the most valuable companies in history. So the iPhone teardowns are a big deal. They're a very popular piece of consumer electronics. When we see the release window coming up, leaks from the supply chain tend to increase, and you have to take those leaks with a pinch of salt. Some of the information might be out of date and has only just now been leaked. When the device lands on our teardown table, we've had 2 weeks to use these leaks to inform our teardown. And on the day of the teardown itself, everything pretty much is quiet. It's the quiet before the storm. And on the morning of the teardown, we're trying to get those devices from our local Apple store. Our office in Chattanooga is ordering a bunch of other devices. In all, for every iPhone teardown, we're usually spending somewhere between 10 and 15 grand on devices.
Wow.
We have a series of reference devices that we'll keep, usually one of each phone that is released, and then we'll have at least a couple of teardown devices, because the process of the teardown, just to give you an idea of how big these operations are and why it needs an entire team, you'll have at least one phone coming and sitting on this teardown table here in our office, and myself or one of the other teardown technicians will be working on prying this open while filming. We have an entire other team behind this wall, and the tech writing team. Tech writing's photo room. They'll be disassembling an entire other device, taking photos for our blog posts that will accompany our videos. And at the same time, a separate team is scoring that same device. So you've got 3 whole teams just working on those 3 aspects. And we'll have the CT scanner. Our latest expense is now getting a whole other device to place in the CT scanners as soon as we receive it. So there are 3 devices immediately in play, and we'll have a spare on top of that. So you're looking at 5 phones in total. 1 as a reference, 1 for the CT, one as a backup, one being torn down by the teardown team that's recording in this room, and one that's being torn down by the scoring and blog post team next door.
How much intuition does it take to tear down one of these devices? I mean, you're able to start with a CT scan, so you can see where the fasteners are, maybe where there's glue. But is there also just a lot of earned experience that you have that, tells you how to attack one of these devices?
Yeah, absolutely. There's it is actually a minimal amount of intuition. It's very surprising. Once you've opened up one iPhone, and it can be like an iPhone 5 and iPhone 6, the structure hasn't changed all that much. You can anticipate the screen is held down by glue. Before any of that, you've got the famous pentalobe screws, P2 screws that are on the bottom. There are 2 of those. And you can expect that on every iPhone. And since the iPhone 4, if I'm not mistaken, those changed from Phillips to pentalobe 2. So once you remove those, on every iPhone, the screen is glued in place. So you apply heat to remove that screw, to remove the screen. And since the iPhone 14, the back cover is now removable as well, which again is heat and the suction cup and some prying. That kind of experience you get from opening up 1 or 2 phones. The Samsung devices are very similar. They tend to be rear entry, so you go through the back panel, and that design hasn't changed. As far as the internals are concerned, the layout of the internals has been very modular on the iPhones right from the beginning. And the reason they've had modular internals is less for the sake of repairability for the end user, and more for their own production process. On the manufacturing line, being able to isolate components that may be faulty and replace them quickly and cheaply is a massive way of saving money during the manufacturing process for those devices. So it just reduces Apple's overheads. And when you consider the number of devices that they're pumping out and producing, that makes a huge difference to their bottom line. It's very important. As the years have gone by, we've been kind of part of our mission as iFixit has been to promote repairability from the consumer side of the bargaining process, the consumer side of this whole transaction. The consumer, at the end of the day, our whole philosophy is around the fact that is based on the fact that you're paying for this device, therefore you own this device, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to repair it. The manufacturer is repairing on the production line. They've already designed a very modular product. So with every teardown that we perform, we like to point this out. Like, this is super modular. If you provide us with the parts, which Apple has finally been doing over the last few years, we count that as a personal success that we've managed to bring attention to this matter and push it through. But the fact that they're providing manuals and parts to allow you to replace these components that are already very modular is a huge win. And it's part of our mission. It's one of the big reasons we do teardowns.
It's huge progress. I mean, you've seen it all over the place. I've noticed it when you've done teardowns that you've been able to detect an evolution in repairability. A lot of stuff has gotten easier, right?
Absolutely. One of the more recent examples, the Microsoft Surface tablets and the Microsoft Surface laptops. The first generation of those devices were very difficult to get into. The Surface laptop, first generation, second generation, as an example, there was a felt cover around the base where the keyboard is, all around the keyboard and the base of the device where the processor and the battery is located. So the only way to get into the Surface level, the first generation of the Surface laptops, was to cut through that felt. And that is destructive. That is, it's silly that they should design it that way. It's discouraging
to a consumer who wants to repair it and unpleasant. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially if you're not used to opening these devices, devices that contain lithium batteries that are consumable components that need to be replaced at some point during the device's life cycle. It's discouraging. And then there's the expense of taking this to a technician, to a repair shop, which they can absolutely do it. They have the skill and the capabilities and the tools to do it. But the expense alone might put people off, right? So we brought attention to this matter over years. We've been hammering Microsoft, hey, like, why are you doing this? Just use screws. And eventually they stopped using just felt and they started using screws. And more recently, one of our crowning achievements, we started working with Microsoft. Approached us to say, hey, we would like to make our products more repairable. We provided direct insight into how they can achieve that. And the result was the new Surface tablets have screens that have very effective but lighter adhesive on the screen. So if you need to pry up the screen, which you will do if you're replacing the battery inside, that's the only way to get inside, the screen doesn't break. Because think about it. You have this really expensive panel on this tablet device, this really nice tablet device. And if you break that panel, the panel can be more expensive than just getting an entirely new device. And you'd want to remove that panel to replace the battery that after 2 or 3 years is worn out. So that was a huge win. And the ability to bring attention to this design flaw to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer to respond positively and say, hey, we'd like to work with you to improve these designs, has been a huge one. And we've seen it across the board. We're now working with the likes of Google and Lenovo and Logitech to bring this kind of repairability, common sense, I'll call it. I'll be a little bit harsh. This repairability perspective to the manufacturers at the very earliest stages of the design process. And it's very beneficial for all of us. It's good for the manufacturer, it's good for the consumer, and ultimately it's good for the planet.
Let's talk about glue for a second. This is something that's surprising to a lot of people who haven't opened a lot of electronics. When we publish a CT scan, or when you all publish a teardown of a piece of modern electronics, often people are shocked by the amount of glue inside. So on the one hand, you have folks like you at iFixit pushing for repairability. On the other hand, there are consumer demands for, compact wireless electronics, for water tightness, for other, aspects of user experience where the engineers have answered by filling these things with glue. Where do you see that battle going? Are you winning the battle and getting, more repairable, less glued assemblies?
So we're definitely making progress. We are absolutely making progress. There are very obvious benefits to using glue, and you can't fault a designer for saying, okay, my specifications are to make this thing waterproof, and it needs to be thin, and it needs to be small. So glue is where you're naturally led to. Glue provides all of those benefits. Where it falls flat on its face is when it comes to portable electronics, which is most of our electronics. The demand for portability in electronics is massive. Where it falls flat on its face is where that built-in power source, the lithium-based battery, wears out. So we'll find consumers over the years have become less and less used to replaceable batteries, to the point where, even the younger generation especially was never exposed to the Nokia 3310 that you and I grew up with. They don't really know that batteries were this replaceable, that their devices could last forever. You could pick up a 3310 right now on eBay and you'll find third-party batteries for it and you could still use it. It would be absolutely fine. You can't say that about these Oakley Meta glasses that we just tore down today. The battery is held inside the right hand arm of this device, and the only way to remove that battery is by applying heat. And when you apply heat to something, usually the plastic that it's made from is more susceptible to deforming before the glue underneath begins to liquefy. So you're damaging the device at that point. It's a destructive disassembly, all to get to a battery that might wear out within 2 years.
Right.
So it's a huge problem. We are increasing awareness, and we are increasing visibility for the average consumer, especially the younger generation, to bring to their attention that this is not the way it should be. It's not a sustainable way of consuming.
Outside of repairability and especially battery replacement issues, as someone who's torn down a lot of products over time and able to look back with some perspective on the history of consumer electronics recently, what else have you seen changing in consumer electronics?
What else has changed in consumer electronics? There's definitely the movement towards repairability. That has been a huge thing, and it's continuing to grow. And awareness on that subject is improved massively, as we've seen by various legislation, both here in the United States and Europe and worldwide. Other changes that we're seeing is just the general advancement in miniaturization, the ability to pack more and more into devices, especially where VR and AR is concerned. That's kind of a pet project of mine, something I'm very interested in. This movement of packing as much as you can into very thin devices, and you're approaching the limits of what's possible. You can go so thin so long as the hardware allows for it, but at some point you have to start offloading that hardware. It's simply not possible. And the Vision Pro has basically Apple took a very brave step, something that Meta has been resisting for years. They removed the battery pack from inside the Vision Pro. It's still a very heavy headset because they went for a very premium looking, premium feeling headset. But the next generation we're expecting to see will be much lighter. It'll be thinner yet, but that battery pack is likely to remain on the outside because it takes up space. And what you'll see eventually is more and more of the processing capabilities are likely to be offloaded from these headsets to make them more comfortable to wear. There has to be a point where we transition from these full VR experiences to just wearing glasses that are augmented reality capable, that are XR, AR capable, and that will inevitably require that we offload more of the process onto devices that are attached to us, like our mobile phones, for example, and the battery packs will be on the outside. That's been a fun thing to watch develop over time.
Hopefully offers more opportunities for repairability too, because then the battery isn't embedded in a wearable device and hard to get to.
Absolutely, yeah. It definitely reduces waste. It makes it easier to access. But even those like the battery packs on the Vision Pro's external battery pack, even that could be more accessible. But in terms of, if we just look at it in terms of recycling, which is not the best way to deal with something, end of life should always incorporate the possibility that we can pass this device on to someone who might want to use it or repurpose it. But even purely from a recycling perspective, the ability to separate the aluminium shell from the battery itself, from the PCB, is very easy on that external pack. Had it been incorporated into the headset, like you said, would have been much, much more difficult to separate.
You mentioned the premium look and feel of the Apple Vision Pro, which is something that I've noticed over a very long period now, since about the introduction of the iPhone. If you think back to the before iPhone era, maybe something like a BlackBerry or a piece of consumer electronics that you would have purchased at the Sharper Image, which was where I was a fan in the early 2000s. You would have something that was like plastic but painted silver to look like metal, or plastic, made to suggest that it was glass. And if you kind of like picked it up, it felt hollow and light, and there's a little bit of a rattle to it. And I think Apple introduced a new expectation among consumers that there be authenticity in material design and an attention paid to the physical look and feel of a piece of consumer electronics. And that carried through into the Vision Pro, which is just a magnificent set of aluminum and glass and, premium custom woven fabric and all of that. Is that actually helpful for sustainability, or is this just a lot of additional aluminum and glass and everything that could have been, lighter weight, lower footprint plastic?
So you're putting me on the spot here a little bit. I think it's...
I like it as a consumer, but I'm just curious about your perspective.
No, I have to... I also have to balance that. As a consumer, I like the premium feel. I also like those premium qualities of a device. But working in the field that I do and being passionate about the repairability and reducing our footprint on this planet, there is absolutely... You're spot on. Everything you said is accurate. The use of glass in the device when it wasn't necessary, you have to wonder how much additional energy they had to expend just to create that glass.
Glass and aluminum both have pretty considerable kind of energy, embodied energy, and they're theoretically recyclable, but as we know, a lot of it doesn't get recycled.
Absolutely. Aside from the waste that will, if it ends up in a landfill and not recycled, like you said, there's something that we're putting into the ground that doesn't belong there. Plastic is probably easier, might be lower energy to produce. In terms of use, it's definitely more useful to have that lighter plastic, but it gives you less of a premium feel. And Apple as a company has never, as far as I've seen in their design process, they don't fill their products with dead weight to make it feel more premium. They don't use materials that fake being premium. It's probably one of the reasons they use titanium, and they've switched back from the iPhone 16. The Pro models at least had the titanium shell, and it sounds like the 17s are going back to aluminium. There are the benefits. Aluminium has better heat dissipative properties. It's lighter. It makes more sense to use. But that's Apple as a company. They'll go for titanium when maybe they don't need to. And there is a cost to that. There is a carbon footprint cost to that, increased energy usage to create that material to give it a more premium feel. But from the consumer's perspective, it's it's appealing, and it's appealing, I guess, because we've been trained to feel that way about these products. There is definitely an ongoing battle where we have to retrain people to think more in terms of sustainability, because it's not sustainable. The amount of resources that we're consuming, the pollution that we're putting out, is simply not sustainable to continue doing this indefinitely. And there's a price to pay, and we all pay it.
It's funny that you mention Apple not filling space with dead weight to make it feel premium. That is actually something we see when we scan counterfeit Apple products. We notice this a lot when we CT scan, counterfeit AirPods and look at them next to the real thing. The counterfeits do in fact have little lead weights in them, or, steel bars in them to make them feel heavier and sort of like overcome the difference in the real quality that's in the Apple product and that weighs something, and I think Apple does a really nice job of balancing the kind of the overall weight and construction and feel in your hand of the product with what it actually needs. And that's what you see when you CT scan a counterfeit of something, is like they're attacking it from the wrong angle. They're just saying like, well, the real thing feels heavy, so we're just going to make this one feel heavy too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's fascinating to see those counterfeits too. I really enjoy throwing those on the CT scanner, because it's immediately obvious which one is the counterfeit and which one's the real deal. The AirPods you mentioned, the fake AirPods you see, they're designed in as minimalist a fashion as possible. And so long as you don't touch them, because even the plastic feels different, so long as you don't touch them, they look identical. They're very, very close in form, at least. But then the magnets that hold the individual earbuds, when you look at the counterfeit one, it's just a square neodymium magnet. They're not cheaping out on the magnet. It's the same magnet. But then you look at the original Apple one, and that magnet is actually carved and formed to fit a very specific profile. And that's very typical. And one of the reasons I've learned to respect Apple's engineering over the years, they put a lot of effort in every minutia of their devices. And that is commendable. It's nice to see that level of thought go into the design of a product. And we benefit from that as consumers. I do wish they'd put a little bit more thought into the life cycle, especially towards the end, in some of these products, but we're working on that too.
Yeah. Something I've noticed is that the Apple's competitors have caught up in many respects in terms of build quality and attention to design. And I'm often accused on social media. I'm an iPhone user myself. My first instinct is to always put an Apple product into the CT scanner and then publish the scans. And so there are always commenters who are like, you're just an Apple partisan and whatever.
A fanboy.
Yeah, I'm not, and I'm not actually. I enjoy it. I think they're great products, but I've just kind of lost track of what else is going on. And whenever I look, I'm impressed. So I'm curious. When you've taken a product apart, you've opened an iPhone or you've opened a Galaxy phone and you're looking at what's inside. Can you read what is in the designers' hearts? Do these companies have different technical approaches, different almost spiritual approaches to what's inside these devices?
That's a very tough question to ask from, which you beautifully put it the other day we were talking. We are generalists. I'm not an engineer. So as a technician, as a layman, I like to think of myself as a layman when I'm looking at the internals. So forgive me if I'm wrong. This do not take this as gospel. But in terms of design philosophy, it feels like there seems to be some balance. Apple's attention to detail and over engineering is famous. They're known for that, and it has its benefits, and it's appreciated by especially by those of us that look inside their devices. It's beautiful inside and out. When you look at Samsung devices by comparison, I do kind of feel like they're always playing catch up in some ways. But in other ways, they're innovating beyond what Apple's risk appetite is. So one of the things about having the most successful single product in human history is that you're less likely to take chances with that product. And I think we see that with every iteration of iPhone's lineup, Apple's iPhone lineup. They will change something in one of the models, maybe one of the less popular models or whatever model that they need to experiment with, but the rest of the lineup will stay the same. They're just not willing to take that risk. Samsung, by comparison, is far more willing to take those risks. They will innovate with things like foldable phones, which has successfully over the years built up a market share to the point where Apple is now apparently releasing their own version of a foldable phone next year. So they're kind of behind the curve there a little bit. Apple is behind the curve. But then you look at other aspects where the iPhone has this dual layer logic board that is highly compact and very efficient. They're using their own custom ARM processors that have been massively successful. And in that respect, Samsung is playing catch up with their own processors, and their logic boards are dual layer as well. But when you look at the layout, it's completely different design. It's not. It doesn't feel like it's optimally designed for the shell of the device. But that could be my Apple bias creeping in here. Which by the way, I was an Android guy. I grew up an Android guy. It wasn't until I started opening these devices that I became an Apple guy. I just appreciate the.
That's actually the best testimony for Apple. I mean, it's one thing if you just sort of like fell into Apple, the Apple ecosystem, like I did. It's another thing if you opened up both and looked inside and really like read what they are, and then adopted one.
I couldn't help it. I walked into this job telling one of my colleagues that I'm a never Apple. And here I am with an iPhone and an Apple Watch Ultra 2. The functionality, the seamless, the software in particular, the seamless integration of software between the Apple devices and their ecosystem is very appealing. Especially as I was saying, I was joking earlier, as I get older, I'm less willing to spend time trying to figure out technology. And I'm still a Windows guy. I will always be a Windows guy. The flexibility Windows provides is superior to Mac OS for me. I will give up a lot to have that freedom. But the ease of use for Apple's ecosystem and integration is undeniable.
For something that's so deeply embedded in your life. I mean, it's it has to be second nature. One of the things that you make look very easy in your teardowns and in your write-ups is, you'll start to take it apart and then you'll just casually point out landmarks along the way. This is the new modem. This is the configuration of the antenna has evolved since the previous version or whatever. How much goes into that? Is that like days worth of research that you've done before you're actually presenting that? Or is that something that you can just intuitively see when you open a phone?
Sometimes it's intuitive. Sometimes that intuition is misplaced and I make mistakes. I think I did that on
commenters who call it out.
No, absolutely. And I'm super grateful that they do. I would hate for the mistakes to go uncaught. We usually don't have days. We usually don't have days. Usually what happens here is that what looks intuitive, this is a pre-recorded video. Like I said, it's not me. I'm just the face of it or the hands of it for the most part for the teardown. But when you're looking at upgrades between generations, when you're looking at changes between the S24 and the S25, very often, most often than not, I would say 90% of the time, it's the entire team that's behind us that's pointing those things out. Like I said, simultaneous teardowns that are going on in the other room, and they will feed that information to us as soon as they find it. Hey, the USB-C port is modular in this new Samsung phone. We should call that out because it is a great innovation to make it more repairable. The USB-C ports as a mechanical component are high wear components, so they will fail more often. The fact that I'm kind of spouting this out to you, what is ingrained knowledge to me now was something that came from our engineers. They taught me this. So like I said, I hate to take credit for other people's work, and there's a lot of other people's work that goes into these teardowns.
Yeah, so tell us about this electrically released adhesive. This is a pretty recent development, right, that you've started to see in iPhones.
Yeah, so we saw it in the base model iPhone 16s first. It's a type of adhesive that is being developed by the likes of 3M and Tessa and others, I'm sure, at this point. And it's an excellent solution to providing accessible battery repairs for the end user. And it's a fascinating case of Apple over-engineering something, and I'm here for it. I love their design, the choice that they've made here. The adhesive that sits under the battery normally, so they used to use pull tabs, right? Apple famously uses pull tabs, and it's a stretch release adhesive that you kind of have to use pointy tweezers to get really close to a lithium battery pouch, which you never want to do. And you have to roll this thing up and you pull on the stretch release adhesive on the older models to remove it from underneath. And like on paper, that is a really good solution. That is a good way to get the adhesive out. The problems start arising when that adhesive gets old and the stretch release tabs would break. So the solution Apple's brought in now is this glue that is electrically conductive. And you form a circuit by creating, you stick an alligator clip to an aluminium foil that touches this adhesive, and on the reverse side of the adhesive, the circuit is closed by going to ground. So the other alligator clip would go to just a screw that is close to the USB-C port and that is connected to ground. And you'll run anywhere between 9 volts and 30 volts through this adhesive. And over the higher the voltage, the quicker the adhesive loses its gluey adhesive properties. So I believe in our teardown video, we ran 20 or 25 volts through it, and over a period of 1.5 to 2 minutes, the glue just stopped being sticky. The chemical reaction that occurred, I believe it pushes the electrons to one side of the glue, and that breaks the adhesive bonds inside the glue, and the battery just falls out. It just flops out. It's making battery replacements very accessible for consumers. You can do this with a 9-volt battery, which most people will have access to. A great way to do it. Great technology. Samsung, by comparison, has done the same thing in a very low-tech manner. They have taken an adhesive strip, a piece of plastic, where the battery sits inside the plastic, and the underneath that battery, there's no adhesive there. It's just sitting on the plastic without any glue. The glue sits on the flaps that fold around the battery like a blanket. So the adhesive is accessible from the top of the battery. You just pull these tabs back and the battery falls out. It's a very low-tech way of achieving the same thing, and both are excellent solutions.
It's like a dollhouse bed, sort of just like peeling away the quilt.
It is. It really is. It's a very clever way, a very clever low-tech solution, and we're fans of both solutions.
So an interesting additional dimension to iFixit is that you all are product developers yourselves. You sell things like these repair kits that are in front of us on the table here. There's this incredible battery-powered soldering iron, which, speaking of technological advances in lithium-ion batteries and so on, I never thought that I would actually see a usable battery-powered soldering iron, but this thing is really, really cool. Tell us about the product development process that you all go through here. In a way, it's a lot of pressure because you're always looking at other people's products and thinking about how they've been developed. Is your product development process here at iFixit informed by what you see in all these other products that you're tearing down?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Now, I have less exposure into that world than the hardware development team that is formed of multiple engineers that work on this stuff. But yes, absolutely, that is the case. The decision to create a product here at iFixit is always driven by our core mission, which is to enable repair in the hands of the consumer. And that was the idea behind the latest product that we created here, the soldering iron and the battery, the portable power bank that powers the iron itself. We were looking at how we can enable people to repair in the field and maybe get them to advance their repair skills by taking up something that maybe they didn't think about ever learning. Soldering is generally considered to be a more advanced skill among the average person, and the average person that holds might pick up a screwdriver might be way less willing to pick up a soldering iron. And part of our mission became to educate people. How do you solder? We've got a lot of material out there to just get people introduced to soldering. And the soldering iron that we designed backs that mission by, first of all, it's our hardware, so it needs to achieve a 10 out of 10 for repairability. We haven't scored this device because it's kind of self-serving to score our own device. We did design it with that in mind. So every component here in this device is fully disassemblable. The lithium battery, the lithium ion, I believe it uses 18650 cells. We sell replacement batteries. We've made it so it's very easily accessible. And the internal components, both on the iron and the power bank, are also accessible. And we have guides online as well as parts to enable people to perform those repairs if they need to. But the decision to design new tools is never for the sake of profit. It's always with the planet and the consumer in mind, and that is one of the things that makes this company very special. And we are absolutely a for-profit company. We are not a charity, but everything we do, every profit we make, is fed right back into our mission. We are not here to roll in the riches. We have a mission, and we stick to that mission.
It's a privilege to be able to work for a company that's able to do that. That's
absolutely. I tell my boss whenever difficult times come up, I tell him I sleep easy at night. I'm not here for the paycheck.
Yeah.
You need the paycheck. Obviously, you have to support your employees and our families. That we do have to be able to do that, but that is not why we're here. Most of us are here, if not all of us are here, because of the mission.
I want to switch gears just a little bit and hear a bit about you. So you mentioned a moment ago that you consider yourself a layperson. You're a very knowledgeable layperson, but you don't have an engineering degree. How did you get into this job?
Oh, definitely not intentionally. It was entirely by accident. So I spent, my degree is in Central and East European history. That's
highly relevant now.
Highly relevant. Not a degree that I consider useful in any way, but that's a personal thing. I pursued my interest. I've always been a history buff, so I pursued my interest at university. I got that degree in 2011 from the University of Glasgow, and then I worked in the insurance industry for 9.5 years as a maritime broker, which is a fascinating world. I don't think people realize how central shipping and cargo transported through on the ocean is to our lifestyles today. Something upwards of 90% of the world's cargo moves by ocean because that's the cheapest and most effective way to do it.
What's the most expensive insurance policy you can buy on cargo and routing? Like what's the most expensive thing to insure?
The most expensive thing to insure. What would your guess be? I want to hear your guess first.
Okay, I would guess electronics sailing through the Suez Canal between India and Europe.
I mean, that would probably be a very good guess.
Okay.
Now, bearing in mind that I wasn't an underwriter, I was a broker. I was only exposed to the contracts that I came across. That would be a very good guess. Now, the liabilities don't arise from where you think they would. So the cost doesn't arise from the fact that you're transferring. Let's say EVs. We've had a few cases where there was one big case where an entire ship full of EVs caught fire and the whole thing sank. It was a terrible loss. So the fire hazard from electronics batteries in particular can be very high. But it's the liabilities that add to the cost. So going through the Suez, if that sinking were to occur on the Suez, that's where you pay a lot of money. That's the highest risk for the insurance company and the shipper and the cargo owners and the ship owner, all of this stuff. Because if you block the Suez, you're blocking an international trade route.
Yeah.
And that will rack up a massive insurance bill.
Interesting.
But in terms of the highest, again, this might not actually be the highest liability, but the biggest one we're all afraid of in that industry is pollution. Pollution is very, very expensive. You have policies, especially where you're looking at oil tankers, but even your average ship has bunkers that are carrying fuel on board that is a pollutant. If it occurs in certain territorial waters, in most territorial waters it's expensive, but certain territorial waters are much, much more expensive than others. The United States, as always, is a prime example. If you have a spill in the United States in the territorial waters where the cost of cleanup is very high. That is when you're looking at the most expensive.
Interesting.
The highest risk. Maybe in terms of risk, it might be lower, but in terms of expense were it to occur, it's probably the most expensive liabilities that you're looking at. And most insurances, at least back when I was working in the industry, will cap oil pollution to something like $6 billion.
Oh my God. Wow.
That is the kind of costs that you're looking at.
So it's like cleanup costs plus fines plus
Absolutely.
everything else. Thank you so much for satisfying my curiosity about marine insurance. Continuing on, so you were in the insurance industry. How did you come to iFixit?
So this was at the ripe age of 33. I think I probably just got a little tired of the insurance industry, and I was looking for alternative careers, alternative avenues. And in my younger years, I'd been in the OTC, the Army OTC at Glasgow, something I enjoyed immensely. And I wanted to try for that. I wasn't yet too old to try for a military career, but I was definitely on the cusp. My wife being American and me generally being a fan of the Air Force, I tried to join the U.S. Air Force. A very wild leap from from history to maritime insurance to a military career. It was an attempt I made later in life, and unfortunately during training. And while I was having a blast and I was having a very good time, at the end of my training, a medical condition popped up that disqualified me from service. So I'd found at the end of that process, I'd found myself in the United States. And my kids were here, my dogs were here. My wife and I had made a plan to move, and we just tried to make it work. And trying to make it work meant moving from San Antonio, where my training was, to the Inland Empire, where my in-laws were, who very kindly housed us while we were refiguring out our lives, to moving to San Luis Obispo on the central coast of California. It was definitely a rough move. There were a lot of unplanned moments there, but we ended up in paradise, and that led to opportunities that arose, and I was open to opportunities at that point. I was trying to figure out where to go with my life, and this opportunity arose. It wasn't apparent at the time. I didn't know what teardowns were. I hadn't actually at the time I'd never even opened a phone up. So really? I learned everything I did on the job here. One of the special things about iFixit, one of the things I love about iFixit is that they will take you if you're interested, and they will invest time into you to bring you up to the level that you're willing to go to. They will help you expand your horizons. And that's I like to think that they saw something in me that's probably the nerdy, gadgety kind of personality that wanted to push the envelope on what I could learn and understand. And the entirely by accident is the short version of that, is how I ended up here.
I love autodidacticism. This is one of my favorite aspects of a career. So it's amazing that you've become such an expert on the complex internals of like ever more complicated products. In closing, I'd love to ask you a question that we ask everyone on the podcast. Tell us about a time when you faced a go, no go moment. What did you do?
So there's been a few go, no go moments in this job. And the one that sticks out to me was, we found this iPhone. It was an iPhone 11, I want to say. It was not the latest model, but not by any means kind of defunct or old. One of our crew, one of our colleagues here that is a software developer, he was out climbing and he found this iPhone 11 at the base of this mountain he was climbing. And it was smashed up, destroyed, completely destroyed. And looking at it, you'd think, well, this is just e-waste at this point. The screen was broken, the back cover was broken. There was a slight bend in the frame.
Scary when you're thinking about batteries. Yeah.
Absolutely scary from a climber's perspective too. You kind of start wondering, well, how far did this fall? And I hope the guy's okay. I mean, there's no backpack or remains here, so the guy's okay. He just lost his phone. So he brings it back in our Slack group. He posts, hey, I found this. Does anyone think they can repair it? And I saw that and I thought, you know what, this would make a really cool story, because if I can bring this back to life and return it to the person that owned it, that would be amazing. So I spent a few weeks, carefully taking this thing apart, and it had been sitting out there for months. So there was some environmental damage. There was some exposure to the environment that had degraded the internals. I could see some rust was beginning to form on some of the screws and metal components. So I kind of cleaned it off, gently took apart everything. The logic board is the brains. Everything else you can pretty much deal with. You can bring a device back to life. Parts pairing is a whole other story, which, if you're interested, we wrote a whole post on parts pairing and why it's bad for repair. But if you have the logic board, a working logic board, you can bring the device back to life. So I implanted the logic board into an entirely new shell, and the device booted against all odds. The device booted. There was a lock screen obviously on there, and there was a background picture of the person that owned it out in the wilderness. He was a climber, so he was a
appropriately,
exactly, a nature enthusiast with the appropriate background on his iPhone. At that point, we almost hit a dead end. We thought, okay, well, we brought the device back to life. There's no emergency contact information because you can punch that into most modern phones. They'll let you put a message in, hey, if you found this phone, you can return it to this person, this address. And none of that was there. And then I remember there was a SIM card inside the device. So I inserted the SIM card into the new device, and you can extract the phone number if it's on that SIM card still, if the SIM card is sound. We extracted the phone number, did a Google search. We found the guy.
Wow.
We found the owner of this phone, and he lived up in Oregon. I won't say where exactly. He was from Oregon. We got all these details out, and the go no go situation occurred at that point because we tried contacting this person. We left messages at the reception at the place he worked at, and he never got back to us.
Really?
Which is a real kick in the shins. We were so close to having this amazing repair story. And we had to decide, like, well, do we still go ahead with this? Do we show that we brought this phone back to life, and how much, and that's a little bit of advertising
about this guy.
Yeah, exactly. It became a privacy issue. And unfortunately, we decided to shut the project down at that point. There's only so far you can go without someone's consent. We brought his device back to life. Hey, if you're listening to this, you know who you are. You live in Oregon. You used to go climbing, and we reached out to you. If you want your phone back, we still have it. It is yours. But yeah, that is the one that sticks in my mind, and it's a really good example of how repair and how empowering people to perform these kinds of repairs can really connect you with others on a personal level. It's a very satisfying part of the work.
It's such a personal device, and that guy doesn't even know how much care went into this. I mean, that's like, something you can't get a mall kiosk iPhone repair shop to do for you. So
sure, I mean, they will try. They'll charge you an arm and a leg. We were doing it for free. Not an arm and a leg, that's not fair, but they will charge for their labor and appropriate costs. But it's a full phone replacement to that point. That is expensive, can be expensive. But yeah, that's my go no go story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shahram Mokhtari, for joining us on Go No Go. It's been a terrific conversation. Check out Shahram's work at iFixit.com. Take a look at his incredible teardowns. He's in all the videos. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for collaborating with us and being partners in our teardown journey.
Our pleasure. Moving on now, we go to headlines and talk about some recent news from the world of product development and manufacturing. And to do that, I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Howe.
Hi, John.
All right, let's take a look. We have some good stuff this week that ties into the sort of CES week that we're in right now.
So the first headline I want to talk about, since we just spoke with Shahram, is one of their teardowns. They recently took apart a Red Magic 11 Pro, which is a liquid-cooled smartphone. I really enjoy it. In the teardown video, Shahram says it has a heat management theme park inside.
So the new iPhone 17 Pro has kind of a passive heat management system, right? Where there's some vapor that evaporates and recondenses and kind of like goes through a cycle. But this is a fully active heat management system like you'd see in a gaming PC, right?
Yeah. And I think Shahram makes some jokes that the passive vapor chamber that is new in the iPhone has been around since 2016 in other phones, but you know how that goes. In the Red Magic 11 Pro, there's a heat sink, there's thermal paste channels, there's a vapor chamber, there's a big fan, and there's liquid cooling. So it's like truly an assortment optimized for high performance, and it's got an 8,000 milliamp hour battery to boot.
They found a way to make the movement of the coolant through the channels look kind of cool, though.
Yeah, if you buy the base level, you can't see the coolant, but if you spend like $100 more, then you can see the coolant.
If you're spending that much on a phone, you should probably just see the coolant. I had never heard of Red Magic before this. It's been around for a little while. It is a Chinese manufacturer that's an affiliate of ZTE, which is one of these giant Chinese electronics companies that's a little bit closer to the military complex than I think a lot of U.S. regulators are comfortable with. So one of these brands that you wonder how long it has on the American market right now.
Yeah, something it reminds me of is like I watch personally a lot of Chinese language dramas, and a lot of these dramas are set in like mobile game development companies.
Huh.
Like the leads will be like a coder and like a designer, and like I've literally watched like 3 Chinese dramas based on like mobile gaming.
Interesting.
And so I feel like when I watch them, it feels like propaganda to like drive like people moving into those industries. And this kind of phone is obviously targeted towards like mobile gaming, which is not really that popular in the US, I feel like, but seems to be like a bigger like target market over there.
Interesting. In that sense, that sounds like the kind of career that's presented in US films as being like a magazine editor, right? There's so many American movies that are based on characters who like work at a cool fashion magazine in New York.
Yeah,
it's very
that's
different.
Like truly the vibe, I think.
Yeah, exactly. This is what everyone wants to imagine themselves doing.
Have you done any like mobile gaming on your phone?
I have a chess app that I play when I'm waiting for my airplane to take off, but
maybe you don't need liquid cooling that.
Yeah, I think my vapor deposition cooling system in my iPhone is doing okay for me for now. Do you play any?
I will play Fortnite on my phone, but it gets really, really hot. So I can only play like 1 round at a time and then I have to give my phone a break. So when I saw this, I was like, oh, maybe I should buy this one. But then like you were saying, like maybe it's a Chinese military industrial complex device. So maybe I shouldn't buy that.
There must be some sort of active cooling accessory that you can get for an iPhone, right? With a fan and, some sort of water cooling.
Probably.
Well, we can look this up sometime. Moving on, you have a headline here about AI data centers, which we talked about in our last episode as well.
Yeah. So talking about like liquid cooling, right? Alyssa Weil at The Verge did an investigation to understand why do we need to build new data centers as opposed to maybe retrofitting old ones. And that's something I'd never really thought about, like all the existing infrastructure that exists. But apparently AI hardware racks, they can weigh up to 5,000 pounds, whereas a traditional compute rack weighs like 400 to 600 pounds.
That's insane. Big difference in floor loading.
Yeah, and what's driving that increased weight? Like there's more electronics, but because those electronics are generating more heat and there's more power and more data, then they also need to have like liquid cooling, right? Water is like 8 pounds a gallon. You have like bigger cables, like thicker channels of copper. So all of that adds up. And exactly like you said, the weight and the heat output exceed the capacity of a lot of the existing infrastructure.
Interesting. This reminds me of a cool thought experiment that the author of Construction Physics, Brian Potter, ran in one of his newsletters, where he asked what it would take to build a house that effectively lasts forever. And his first point is that the reason that most houses don't last forever isn't their structural capabilities. It's that they're functionally obsolete and they get demolished, right? People's tastes change. They want a house in a different style. They want to be able to live in it differently with an open kitchen or whatever. It's not so much that that the building, falls apart as that requirements change. And this is a great example of this. A lot of these older data centers are only a few years old, but the functional requirements of being a data center are changing really rapidly.
Mm-hmm. And the other reason you wouldn't necessarily want to convert existing data centers is that there's the AI boom, but there's still a need for non-AI workloads like enterprise storage and municipal systems.
Right. Not everything is AI yet.
Yeah.
We still have some databases that need to be joined. Moving on to another article from The Verge about satellites.
So last week, some Starlink satellites and Chinese satellites nearly collided. They passed within 200 meters of each other. This is
something we're probably going to see more of, right? The space, we've been warned for some time that space is becoming crowded.
Yeah. And so part of why this near miss occurred is that the Chinese operator wasn't sharing their trajectory data. So Starlink satellites can autonomously maneuver to avoid objects, but because there's more and more like unknown or uncoordinated satellites, that risk is growing. There's more satellites than ever. And with that, they're maybe a little less controlled.
So is there no standard for commercial satellite operators to sort of like have a database that shows where their satellites are and where they might collide?
It doesn't seem that there is a global standard. So there's probably like best practices, but these days it seems like anyone can shoot stuff into space.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Starlink satellites up in the sky?
I just saw recently on Reddit like a post from a launch where you see like all of them in a row, but I haven't seen it personally. Have you?
You can see them from Lake Tahoe, where the sky is very dark at night and very clear and dry. And after your eyes adjust, you start to notice these little tiny dots moving everywhere. Just like the number of satellites up in the sky is extraordinary. And when SpaceX is launching Starlink satellites, they have a very distinctive pattern that you saw in the Reddit video, where they kind of get strung out in a line and go marching across the sky, maybe a dozen at a time. And very gradually they spread out a little bit and distribute themselves more, in their orbits. But it's very striking right after they're launched. And they're launched from a site in Southern California, not too far from where iFixit is.
One concept I learned about from the article that I wasn't familiar with was Kessler syndrome, which is this theory that there could be a cascading chain of collisions with satellites and space debris that could make entire parts of orbit unusable.
Interesting. So you create like a cloud of debris dust, and then it becomes impossible not to run into it.
Yeah, exactly. And it definitely seems like maybe we're getting closer and closer to that possibility as even more satellites are launched.
A few years ago, China's military destroyed a satellite using a satellite targeting weapon of some kind. And it was controversial for two reasons, one of which is satellites have always been seen as kind of off limits. They're this type of military parity that you can have. Everyone has their satellites. Everyone can look at everyone and we're all safe. And if you develop the ability to wipe out everyone else's satellites, then you kind of introduce this asymmetry. But the other reason it was controversial was that it created a bunch of space junk that made it much harder to have satellites go through that area.
Interesting. So the next news article I have is from the Financial Times, and it's titled "The Surprising Survival of Fashion Catalogs." So it's a profile of how printed fashion catalogs have actually been doing really well and convincing certain millennial and Gen Z and Gen X shoppers to buy things from brands they might not otherwise consider.
This is something that, if you were to ask a retailer, 5 years ago to extrapolate from the trends in like catalog printing and e-commerce, you'd conclude that there would be no catalogs left in a few years. But some of these companies are still making it work.
Yeah, they find that it really cuts through the noise. So increasingly brands are finding like digital marketing, like their returns on their budget are maybe decreasing as it becomes more saturated. And people too are kind of used to like looking past digital ads. But once you have something physical, it kind of captures your attention in a different way. It might linger on like a kitchen countertop for like a week and give people the opportunity to decide they like something after all.
I myself look at anything that arrives in the mail for much longer than I look at the average online ad, right? You're walking back from your mailbox and of course you have to glance at this thing. Compare that to the amount of time it takes to scroll straight past a banner ad online.
Yeah, I have this pair of velvet Birkenstocks that I always get compliments on, and my mom bought them from a mail order Birkenstock catalog like recently, like 6 months ago.
I got a catalog a little while ago from what looked like a brand new menswear brand that looked really, really cool. And I had never seen this brand before, but they had cool looking flannel shirts, and I considered buying one. And then I Googled it and the return address on the catalog and found that it was sort of a catalog mill. It was a company that just like created brand new brands and, built catalogs around them, and then was like sourcing the clothing from like existing low cost suppliers. This is a way of doing business that's very familiar online, right? You have like Amazon storefronts and Temu storefronts that are just kind of like going on AliExpress and doing small level importing and trying to create product descriptions that are slightly more compelling than other product descriptions and sort of earn an arbitrage, margin that way. But this existed before that as well in the world of catalogs. This company was just churning out menswear catalogs, and the reviews were not good. Apparently, it was very, very flimsy flannel shirts.
I think what the catalog also is effective is it can be more of like a curation, right? Kind of like a magazine style of an aspirational lifestyle element, and that might make the product seem more attractive.
Yeah, I still get a couple of magazines, and reading them is pretty aspirational, I find. They sit around and I don't want to get rid of them because someday I'm going to get around to reading that. And I think catalogs have a similar aspect. I just want Sky Mall to come back. I really need some way to organize my garden hoses. All right, moving on to our next headline on lidar. This is an area that you know a lot about.
Yeah, so Sean O'Kane has an article in TechCrunch called How Luminar's doomed Volvo deal helped drag the company into bankruptcy, as they just recently filed for Chapter 11.
What was Luminar?
Luminar was a prominent LiDAR sensor maker, And there was a period of time, maybe not even like 5 years ago, where there were a million LiDAR companies, it felt like, right? Velodyne was one of the early comers to the fold. And then there was this feeling that every single car was going to be covered in sensors so that you could have self-driving in your driveway.
So did automakers really understand what they were going to do with these LiDAR sensors, or did they kind of just like throw them onto their cars and figure they would, figure it out later?
I think it was similarly aspirational to maybe the magazines or the catalogs. Yeah. There was this feeling, right, that's the future, and automakers, they don't want to be left out of the future. So they were making these investments and commitments that they were going to adopt this technology. But any kind of hardware technology is such a long lead time, right? So they kicked off deals with this explosion of LiDAR makers, such as Luminar. But then gradually they came to realize that the software was actually really, really, really hard. And that's part of why Volvo, right, they signed the deal with Luminar in 2020 for 40,000 sensors. In 2022, it had gone up to 1.1 million sensors. But then in 2024, they reduced the forecast by 75%. And they cited that they didn't have software actually capable of using the LiDAR.
Interesting. So a LiDAR module that an automaker would buy and put in a car is not actually doing any decision making then, right? It's just giving you a set of signals that you have to have software to interpret, and that would come from another source.
Mm-hmm. It's giving you like a 3D map of all of the data, but like, what does that data mean, right? Like identifying that those points are a person, and then how do you react to the person? And I think the decision-making part is really challenging.
Does this feel like a setback for kind of the vision of self-driving everywhere within a few years? Is this a way that the automotive industry is saying it's going to be a little while longer?
I think so. Like the one market that really did a lot to adopt LiDAR on vehicles was China, right? So you look at the LiDAR maker Hesai, which is kind of half Chinese, maybe sort of American. They kind of promote themselves a little bit of both. They have offices in Palo Alto. But they were doing really well, like selling a lot of units to big companies in China like Li Auto. But there were sort of like rumors or murmurings that like a lot of the Chinese EV companies, they were putting LiDAR on to be differentiated. Like, look, we have the newest technology, but that the sensors might not actually be like doing anything, just like purely decorative. And now that competition in China is so much stronger, that there's even more like low-cost EV companies than ever. A lot of even those companies have been pulling back on their LiDAR adoption.
Interesting. So it's like LiDAR is the next generation of, exotic like engine cooling systems that like wannabe muscle cars have a lot of like big cooling ducts on them. I feel like this is the technological equivalent of that.
And you can look to China really for like the leading edge in some ways because they are not so regulated, right? Which is like a lot of cons, but like some pros in the sense that they can experiment with these things. So I feel like looking to the future, that's a place to monitor, like if that really starts to take off again.
Right.
And the LiDAR companies in the US that have survived, they really pivoted or always had a business model of also doing industrial robots, like warehouses, construction. But Luminar was always really, really dedicated to automotive only. And that's part of what really set them up to fail, I think.
What are the other applications for LiDAR that hold some promise?
A lot of industrial stuff, like you think of Amazon's warehouses, like there's a lot of like robots moving around in there, and it's a much more controlled environment, right? So that's really helpful. There's some like IoT applications as well. You can think even like our meeting rooms here have like people counting, so you can use LiDAR for people counting, like in a shopping mall or environments like that. They're definitely not as consolidated or uniform as automotive though, which I think is why like, I was doing some LiDAR like laser chips in the past. Right? Automotive seemed the most promising because you have big customers that could like buy a lot of units at a consumer scale, and like those are much lower volume. Yeah,
you can build your entire business on 4 accounts or something in that field. Much harder to do outside of automotive. Let's move into our final headline. This has to do with packaging.
So Packaging Dive has an article out called Cold Chain Packaging Companies Adapt as Dry Ice Supply Falters. And so dry ice supply right now, it's tightening because we're seeing less CO2 production, and that's really a critical lever for dry ice. And these shortages have been pretty disruptive because it's driving up the cost, and there aren't really great alternatives.
This is fascinating. I had never considered that the supply of carbon dioxide might be a big enough factor at this level to create a shortage of dry ice. But carbon dioxide comes from a couple of places for industrial use. One is natural gas, where methane is split apart into carbon dioxide and hydrogen as part of the ammonia manufacturing process that supports fertilizer production. So it's a byproduct of the fertilizer production process. And so more CO2 is produced when more fertilizer is in demand. And if you're not making fertilizer, it's not lucrative enough to run the process just to make carbon dioxide. So you wind up with a shortage of CO2. The other major industrial source of carbon dioxide is apparently the ethanol manufacturing industry, because you have yeast that's digesting corn into a combination of ethanol and carbon dioxide. And so you're able to pull the carbon dioxide off the top of that process. There too, that's an industry that's influenced by like the cost of gasoline and, whether regulations are requiring fuel manufacturers to blend in some amount of ethanol. There are a lot of like seasonal considerations in when the corn is available and when the ethanol is made. And then so there's a lot of variability on the supply side of carbon dioxide that I had never considered.
Dry ice production in the US is currently around 4,600 tons per day, and that demand has grown 5% annually for nearly a decade. But CO2 production, like you mentioned, is kind of seasonal, and that capacity has only grown by 0.3% per year in the past 10 years. So it's not keeping pace at all.
Interesting.
Do you know what's driving the increased demand for dry ice?
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of things. One is GLP-1s, which have to be shipped in cold supply chains. So Ozempic and Wegovy and so on are so popular that they are driving a meaningful increase in demand for dry ice. And then there's also an evolution in abrasive blasting. So using dry ice instead of sand to do a blasting process as like an industrial cleaning process, or even in construction. It's a much more environmentally friendly and easier to clean kind of process, because you, instead of blasting something with sand, you blast it with crushed up dry ice, and then the dry ice just evaporates after it does the grinding, and you don't have to like sweep up a ton of sand. So that has also increased demand for carbon dioxide.
That makes sense, since that's also the appeal of dry ice for like food packaging, since it goes straight from a solid to a vapor, so you don't end up with like puddles in your box.
That's right. But there's a lot of interest in alternatives for that reason as well, because if you have a lot of packages with a lot of dry ice, they're constantly, sublimating and creating a significant volume of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a little heavier than air, so it can settle in indoor spaces and cause some pretty dangerous suffocation. Plus, it's dangerous to have a lot of expanding gas. So there are limitations on how much dry ice can be on airplanes, for instance.
Yeah, the popularity of dry ice, even as alternatives are explored, is that nothing seems to have the same pound per pound like cooling power. Like, for example, biodegradable gel packs are really popular right now as an alternative, but single-use salt-based options can be 15 to 20 times more expensive than dry ice.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen those around, but mostly only shipped with, much higher value products. The ultimate fallback is the third source of carbon dioxide, which is natural carbon dioxide reserves. There are a couple of places. There's one big site in Colorado, and there's one in Mississippi, where carbon dioxide is basically just extracted by wells in the ground. It's a naturally occurring geological deposit, and there are energy companies that just kind of develop it the way that you would see a natural gas field developed, so they can pull carbon dioxide out of the earth. What
are they using that for?
Also, I think industrial processes of various kinds, producing fertilizer, the chemical industry, that type of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. Weird, but that is the ultimate fallback. I was curious about whether carbon dioxide could just be pulled out of the air and isolated and condensed, but apparently it only makes up about 0.04% of the air by volume, and concentrating it requires a lot more energy than getting it as the byproduct of one of these industrial processes, or even just mining it.
We're so concerned about CO2 emissions, and then we mine more of it.
Yeah, that's right. Let it out of the ground. Yeah. Seems like a bad idea. But the fourth place that you'd imagine being an obvious source of carbon dioxide is the air. We are, after all, trying to get carbon out of the air. Apparently, carbon dioxide only makes up about 0.04% of the air by volume, and concentrating it is very energy intensive. But there are a lot of companies out there that are interested in direct air carbon capture for the reason of slowing climate change. So maybe we'll see some progress on that at some point in the future, and we'll have a more reliable source of carbon dioxide. If you have a headline that you want us to talk about on this show, just email us at gng@lumifield.com. That's GNG like go, no, go @lumifield.com. Now we're going to transition to our final segment, which is called Reconstructions, where we look back on the history of something in the world of product development or manufacturing and see what it can tell us. Today, in honor of this being CES week, we're going to look back at a famous bit of consumer electronics, one that flopped very memorably. Today, we're going to talk about Juicero. What do you remember about Juicero, Alex?
I remember at the time of Juicero's fall, there were these great stores all around the Bay Area called Beta, where you could go get hands-on with various like Kickstarter-esque projects. And this just really seemed like the pinnacle of that kind of like silly gadget. Yeah,
a gadget for gadget's sake, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So Juicero was founded in 2013 by a guy named Doug Evans, who was a raw food evangelist. And it arose from the success of a handful of companies that had adapted the famous razor and blades model into the high-end food space, in particular Nespresso. So this is where you sell a single fixed cost device, and then you have a very profitable, continuous, consumable product that you're selling to the owner of that. In this case, Juicero was a countertop machine that you would load pre-filled packets full of fruit into, and then it would squeeze them very, very hard and create fresh juice.
And the founder, Doug Evans, he was really a raw food evangelist, right? So before starting Juicero, he had created a juice chain in New York that became very popular and kind of went from like one of the earliest cold pressed juice chains in New York. And now, of course, it's like such a pervasive wellness trend. And his concept, right, was like, how can he bring that to more and more people?
At the time, there were a number of these types of devices that were like a countertop maker of something that you would go to like a high-end, fast service restaurant to buy. So I remember seeing something at CES that was like a countertop yogurt maker. There are several countertop beer brewing systems, like homebrew systems, where you buy, pre-measured packets of things and you put them in, and then you walk away for like 2 weeks and you have beer. There is a cocktail making machine that I hear ads for a lot on podcasts nowadays. So it's a pervasive, appealing idea for people that, you have some kind of high-end food that you go to a restaurant or a cafe and buy, and instead you could have that same experience in your home, but without like so much as dirtying, a bowl in the process of like making it.
And this was also, I think, peak IoT, right? So it's like, what if your kitchen mixer was connected to the internet, right? What if your juicer is connected to the internet?
So many people were asking that question back in like 2013, and Juicero indeed used consumable packets full of fruit that were marked with QR codes. So when you put it into the machine, the kind of serial number would be read off of it. The machine would log that. The machine was connected to Wi-Fi. Investors in that kind of product always hoped that the direct connection to the internet would make it really easy for these things to just like restock themselves. This was also around the time that Amazon marketed an IoT button that would automatically, with a single push of the button, reorder some consumable product. So they made them branded for like Tide laundry detergent and Cascade dishwasher soap and so on. The idea was you just like push this button and it refills. So a lot of people were interested in that idea around the time that Juicero came out, that you could have an internet connected machine that processes some consumable product and then like reorders it for you before you run out. It makes the razor and blades model super appealing.
And that's what made it so attractive to investors. I mean, they really raised an incredible amount of money. They raised over $120 million.
That is a ton of money. And it took them a couple of years to launch. And the product that they came out with was exceptionally highly engineered. There's a great article by Ben Einstein, who was a hardware investor at the time at a firm called Bolt, and a very thoughtful chronicler of this kind of like flowering of new hardware products. He took one of these apart and found that it was really, really over-engineered to the point that its design was, you would call it wasteful. I mean, in terms of sort of what it took to bring it to market and what it took to build each one of these.
Yeah, the images in his teardown are incredible. He highlights that there's 8 machined metal parts that have like really complex curves to them or so that would take a really long time to make, and how that was such an interesting decision because, of course, machined metal parts don't really scale with volume.
Yeah, that's right. They have a relatively flat cost curve, unlike injection molding, where you just cut the mold once and then keep churning out parts. He estimated that the machined aluminum components inside the Juicero probably represented like half of its BOM cost. And as you said, a lot of them have really complex curves, 3D curves even, which would require a lot of machine time to be able to do, or machining on a kind of an exotic like 5-axis mill.
The machine also was extremely powerful, which, famously maybe excessively powerful. It could exert up to 8,000 pounds of force, like this relatively bigger than I think the investors expected, but relatively small device on your counter.
That's right. So it's a real engineering challenge. But as Bloomberg News famously discovered in the spring of 2017, it was about as easy to just take one of these bags of fruit and squeeze it with your hands. And in fact, it was faster than running the machine, because the machine is squeezing these 2 giant plates together and trying to provide even pressure on a bag. But it turns out your hands are actually pretty efficient at squeezing something like a bag and getting the juice out.
Right. So for using your hands, which are free, right, you could get 7.5 ounces of juice. And for using this $700, later $400 machine that has machined parts and a custom power supply, custom gearbox, you could get 8 ounces of juice.
That's right. And Juicero only sold the juice packets to owners of the Juicero machines. You couldn't get your hands on them without a Juicero machine. So it was almost as though they anticipated this problem. But they seem to have wound up in an awkward position where the original vision was that the packets are full of whole, or cubed fruit, and that at the point that it's in the machine, it's actually being turned into juice then. But they seem not to have been able to get that aspect to work. And so the packets they were shipping were quite close to being juice already.
Yeah, I think they're already like in a pulp stage. And they were saying, you can open up the packets and you can use the pulp. I think in a podcast with Kara Swisher, the founder was saying people are turning into pizza crust and like eating it like hundreds of different ways because it's fiber.
But if you have to open the packet and do that, it kind of like reduces the appeal of this all-in-one, no mess countertop juicing machine. So after that Bloomberg article came out in April of 2017, they published a 1-minute video showing a reporter squeezing the packet and getting juice out of it faster than the machine. And that video went viral. And within less than 6 months, Juicero was no more.
Yeah, it was such a expensive endeavor. And I think they invested so much of that capital up front before really testing the market and the demand. Like they had their own assembly facility in California, so that's not cheap. It's a fresh supply chain. We were just talking about like cold storage, right, and cold shipping. So that was also extremely expensive. They had servers and food compliance issues. And so there was just a lot of money that they spent. I think Doug said they'd spent 33 months in stealth, right? So that's all time they were spending money building this product without actually validating that anyone would want it or how they would use it.
That's right. And Ben Einstein's article asks a very thoughtful question. If they had raised $10 million instead of $120 million, what efficiencies would they have sought out and implemented? The machine would have looked very, very different. Here during CES week, it's a good time to reflect on, the excesses of product development sometimes, and the value of, as you say, experimenting as you go, really understanding what the market wants and looking out far ahead enough to know whether what you're developing is necessary. Check out the show notes attached to this episode, where you can find links to the famous Juicero teardown and the famous Juicero squeezing demonstration video. And if you want to get in touch with us, just email gng@lumifield.com. We love hearing from all of you. We also love the reviews that you've been leaving on this podcast. Those help the podcast find its way to people who enjoy listening. Go No Go is brought to you by Lumifield, whose advanced manufacturing technology gives engineers the power to deliver better products faster than ever. You can learn more at lumifield.com. For Go No Go, I'm John Brunner.
And I'm Alex Howe.
Go No Go is brought to you by Lumifield, which was founded to upgrade manufacturing. You can learn more at lumifield.com. Go No Go is produced by Austin Carter and edited by Brian Tran, with additional assistance from Eric Petralia.